Me ha parecido muy interesante lo que habéis hablado sobre la razón, pero también cómo podemos utilizar las emociones para el progreso. Esto es algo muy, muy delicado y muy difícil. ¿Cómo se puede hacer? Y luego otra pregunta a ti, porque Stephen, tienes que saber que cuando empezamos a hablar de este acto no era así, pero ahora Luis es candidato también de un partido político para las elecciones europeas. Entonces, te he oído hablar de patriotismo, pero ¿cómo vamos a hacer un patriotismo europeo? ¿Nos puedes contar un poco esto? Bueno, pues aquí ya tenéis mucho para hablar.
You start on emotions.
I think the question of how we translate the objective progress that we have made and which more lies ahead. I mean, when you hear talk about artificial intelligence, the dematerialization of the economy, it's usually presented in a context of fear and dread and anxiety. But if artificial intelligence can diagnose a tumor better than a doctor, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing.
Absolutely.
Likewise, if I want to watch a movie or listen to a piece of music and I don't have to pay a lot of money for a physical object, but I can just dial it up on my computer screen or my TV, that's also a good thing. If jobs that are horribly dangerous and boring and tedious, like mining coal and picking fruit and making beds and stocking shelves, are replaced by robots, at least in theory, that is another huge boon. So it's a huge benefit for humanity. So one of the challenges, as you've mentioned, is how do we deal with the fact that the benefits could be unevenly distributed, that if the coal miners are being replaced, what are the coal miners going to do? And another is, how do we change the narrative, the emotions, so that people realize that there has been tremendous progress and that there's a potential for much more. At the end, I said, half jokingly, is the conquest of disease and poverty and war boring? And maybe the problem is that it has been left to be boring, and we do need to inject new energy, moral passion, perhaps emotion into the thrilling aspects of progress. And we know that it has been done, that there have been politicians, unlike Donald Trump, who campaigns on fear and dread and alarm and pessimism. But there have been highly successful, optimistic politicians. Franklin Roosevelt, who faced much greater challenges than we're facing because of artificial intelligence and network effects now. I mean, he had a war and a Great Depression. Ronald Reagan, on the other side of the political spectrum, was famously optimistic. Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, I'm mentioning American politicians. So there does seem to be some kind of optimistic charisma that in the political sphere can be used. Also, in the greater narrative, in the education system, among intellectuals, among journalists, I remember as a child, growing up in the early 1960s, there was a feeling of tremendous progress and optimism. Many of them are in things that today we have great fear of. Nuclear power, that was going to deliver humanity from energy poverty. The United Nations, that was going to bring peace to the world. The Peace Corps, there was a feeling that the world was really getting better. Now, some of it was a fool's paradise, because in the early 1960s, people were not aware of racial oppression in the United States, of poverty in the United States and worldwide, of autocracy. But still, there was a positive narrative that we have not yet been able to recover. We, meaning we liberals, cosmopolitans, Enlightenment figures. And I do consider it a challenge how to arouse people's emotions. We know that it can be done, and the question is how.
So I mean, far from me to say that progress is in any way, technological progress in any way, a negative thing. I mean, obviously, I completely agree with you that It's great if, if doctors can do their job better. It's not obvious that if you're a radiologist and they tell you every diagnosis will be done by a machine, it's not obvious that you'll feel happy. I remember Stephen Schmidt, the campaign manager of McCain, saying on television, look, we are all very excited talking about how self-driving cars will be a reality and self-driving trucks will be a reality very soon. But the truth of the matter is, driving things around is the main job for middle-class, uneducated Americans. And if you are one of those people and you've been driving a truck for 20 years, it's easy that we say progress is great, but it's inevitable that you're going to be looking at the television and wondering, what's that mean for me? What is it going to mean? What's going to happen? Now, as to politicians and their happiness, I wanted to ask you something that you have edited recently, I think for the papers of National Academy of Sciences. I'm not sure if that's the journal, which I think is really exciting. So here's the paper. It's December 2018. So maybe I just should describe, but anyway. So these scientists have compiled a measure of factor analysis, a measure of complexity and of emotionalness of the language. And what they find is that, first of all, Trump is the politician in the history of the United States who speaks in a more emotional and less rational and more coarse way, etc. And second, that actually has been a secular decline in that, which I find very interesting. Now, the question is, you could take this as exogenous and say, look, this is happening, this course is getting worse, people were more optimistic before, more rational, now they aren't. The other possibility is that there is some demand for this kind of language. I mean, why are we seeing that?
Yes, this is an analysis of the confidence and the simplicity of presidential communications, which quantitatively has been going down, and Trump is pushing it even farther down. Yes. But he's the point being that he is an extreme example of a trend that has been taking place, although it is not taking place in parliamentary debates. So it's not the entire culture, but there is something about presidential speeches in particular. And I was the editor for this this piece. It came as something as a surprise to me, and part of making sense of it, particularly the fact that that since most trends tend to involve greater sophistication, greater complexity, yeah. Why would this be simpler? It may speak
more educated population that should be able to understand.
Yes, but it may also be a kind of perverse kind of sophistication of how you get elected in a democracy. And the paradox of democracy is that as H.L. Mencken, the American humorist, put it, democracy is the theory that people know what they want and they deserve to get it good and hard.
Yes.
So, and this goes back to the paradoxes of democracy go back to Plato, and once again I'll call out Rebecca Goldstein, who wrote a book, Plato at the Googleplex, on the continuing relevance of the philosophical paradoxes, conundrums, issues that he raised 2,300 years ago. But one of them is that when we all talk about what is best for society and how society ought to be run, we might come up with one answer. Then when we take a vote in the entire country, we might get a very different answer. And if we believe in democracy, we've got to figure out how to reconcile those two conflicting demands. And it's possible that the simplicity and confidence of presidential communications may be a kind of ingenuity at how you get yourself elected as president, which may not lead to the most sophisticated policies, but it might satisfy the narrow goal of how do I beat my opponent.
If I can say one thing to that, and it's very interesting, we haven't talked about, none of the two of us talked about social networks, but here is a beautiful fact for my paper also in the proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. What they find is that when you make a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram post or social media post that is more emotional, that is more emotionally loaded, that you put something which is disgusting, something which is in any way emotionally kind of harsh or especially negative, it spreads much more within your own networks. So if you're red, I'm on the reds, and you're blue, I'm on the blues. In the US, red is different than abroad. Red is Republican and blue is Democrat. and it spreads less between communities. So it seems like if you want to make your language effective, it seems, for your own followers, you have to make it coarser, nastier, etc., at least within social media. So that does suggest that as people are more sophisticated about how to engage with humans, the language gets worse and discourse gets worse, which, I mean, if that's true, it's not very promising, to be honest.
No, but it's no. It is a fascinating study, but there's also, though, before we give up on the rationality of humanity, and we don't want to go in the direction that we think, how do we intelligent people get our way over what all these stupid people out there want? That's definitely not the way that we want to go to restore liberal democracy. And so I don't think, even though I do think that we need to mobilize positive emotion in service of the values that we've talked about, we should not underestimate people's ability to process facts either. And another recent study by a political scientist named Brendan Nyhan showed that if you present people with data in graphs, they actually can change their minds, including on issues in which they have a strong politicized opinion. Now, this made me feel very happy because I tell my story in graphs. But for example, if you show climate change, especially in the United States, is very controversial. If you tell people all the studies show that the global temperature is increasing, the conservatives still don't believe it. If you show them graphs from 3 different scientific data sets of temperature over time, and they all go up, then a large percentage change their mind. Say, oh, I guess it is going up after all. Conversely, now this is, crucially, this can't just be a story of how we convince conservatives. And so Nyhan also looked at a data set that goes against the expectations of liberals. And this was shortly after during the Iraq War, after the George W. Bush's surge, where he put in a huge number of additional American troops, and the number of terrorist attacks went down. And again, this is something where liberals were not willing to credit George W. Bush for this, and so he did the same experiment, either telling people or showing them the graphs. And the graphs really do show that the number of civilian deaths went down following the surge. And again, the people on the left changed their mind. So together with mobilizing emotion, of course, in a way that we can defend. It can't just be meeting lies with their lies with our lies, their demagoguery with our demagoguery. I think we also have to be clever about where facts and reason really do change minds. There's a saying that reality is, truth is what, when you stop believing in it, it doesn't go away. Is that right? Truth, reality? From the writer Philip K. Dick. So there is a built-in advantage of, despite the fake news and the post-truth era and so on, reality really is reality, and it is something that can be worked with together with the emotions, so that it's not just a battle of the spin doctors, a battle of the propagandists.
Estaría bien que hablásemos de esta idea de patriotismo, qué sentido tiene.
Yeah.
Patriotism?
Yeah.
Sobre todo teniendo disculpen, se me olvidó el micro. Sobre todo, pues, cómo crear mayores unidades, que como dice Steven Pinker también en sus libros, los conglomerados cada vez más grandes de personas, expandiendo el círculo de la solidaridad. Esto es una garantía de que vamos a menos guerras, etc. Estamos construyendo Europa, estamos muy comprometidos con Europa. Yo estoy en el Parlamento trabajando cada día por Europa, pero tú te vas a incorporar ahora y me gustaría saber cómo hacemos esto de la patria, cómo lo ves tú.
I mean, the first point is I think we all have multiple identities. So I see myself as Spaniard and European, and I'm an economist, and I am a Chicago guy who's been kind of half of my professional life working in Chicago. So all of those things are all compatible. I mean, the people who think that we only have one identity are totally wrong. Anybody can make this experiment and see that with themselves that we have multiple identities. So the question is, can we have also multiple emotional allegiances? And we can. We can have a positive view of a common project for Spain, and a positive view of a common project for Europe, and a positive view of a common project for the world. And all of those things, in my opinion, are possible. What they all have in common is that we have to work with this, with getting out of just showing people the statistics. All of them, we have to be able to mobilize something about Europe that goes beyond saying, oh, costs for Europe are much, much more than benefits. It's much better. The cost-benefit analysis favors continuing in Europe. That's not just going to cut it, I think. I think that you need to really persuade people in their hearts that there is something really valuable in Europe, and there is something really scary, honestly, if we go back to the nation state. And the truth of the matter is, if you look at Europe, if all these populists obtain power in the same way as they did in the UK, if we have Hungary, Poland, Italy, etc., naming commissioners, you're going to have a European Commission, which is the European government, that will be in some one-third populist, and then you have a parliament which is one-third populist. You can easily get to a point where Europe disintegrates and we're back to the 30s. So I think to persuade people there is a project here worth fighting for in the future, and to try to encourage them to do it with their hearts is not only possible, but I think necessary.
Yeah, the question is how, is this on? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Question is how to get the advantages of patriotism,
Without.
which is people working for a common project that it benefits everyone, but that people can't pursue individually or at the level of the tribe or the clan,
Exactly.
without getting a kind of ethnic or racial nation state, which would take us back to the 1930s.
Exactly.
So one could say that one of the problems with Iraq or Afghanistan is that there is no concept of Afghanistan or Iraq as a entity that is worthy of people's loyalty, sacrifice, working together. The loyalty is to the tribe, and Iraq is just a bunch of lines on a map. Can that be done without identifying that identity with a race or ethnicity? Well, the United States and to some extent Canada have shown that experiment can more or less work, because even though when America had a lot of immigrants, there were the Italians and the Irish and the Jews and the Germans, and there were ethnic tensions, but somehow the concept of being an American superseded the concept of being an Italian or a German or an Irish. Now, I guess there was hope that the entity called Europe would supersede being a German or an Italian, but I don't know if people get that glow of patriotism when they see those stars in a circle, the way they do when they see the tricolore or the other symbols. Now, is this a hopeless project, or can Europe be the target of people's patriotic emotions, their fellow feeling? Can it be a salient identity among, and I completely agree that our hope comes from the fact that even though we are a tribal species, what counts as a tribe, fortunately, can be very elastic, and can be, and there can be several of them at a time.
I think, my answer is, definitely the populists are trying to undermine that. They talk always about some bureaucrats in Brussels who are trying to manipulate your life for globalist purposes and so on. Also in Spain, some of those populists. And they're trying to break that allegiance to some extent. And the truth of the matter is, until now, most of the allegiance to Europe has been mostly rational. I think you've seen a big increase in European patriotism in the UK. For the first time, you see demonstrations with the flags and people really getting emotional about Europe, etc. I hope it doesn't have to get to the point where there is a exit or a threat of an exit for people to rouse those emotions. But clearly, the Brexit has made people realize that Europe is something they want to fight for.
Me gustaría hacer una pregunta, quizá una pregunta final, Sobre populismo, me interesa muchísimo porque esto en el Parlamento se ve muy claro. Hay dos tipos de populismo. El populismo que hablábamos antes, lo que ocurre en Cataluña, lo que ocurrió con el Brexit. Vamos a volver otra vez a esa historia que tenemos común, nosotros solos, etcétera. Pero hay otro populismo. Por ejemplo, me gustaría que supierais que uno de los argumentos que se utilizó para la aprobación o no de un producto químico era que se había recogido 1 millón de firmas contra este producto químico. Quiero decir que también está el populismo de los miedos a los transgénicos o los miedos a un producto químico concreto. ¿Cómo podemos defendernos con eso? Porque eso también es populismo. ¿Y cómo lo hacemos entender a la gente que esto también es populismo?
You want me to start? No, creo que, sorry, I think that the social media is helping that kind of bubble. The algorithms show us what we want to hear, and as Steve said, he knows much more about those biases. We have this confirmation bias. We want to hear what we think we know. We want to hear things that confirm our beliefs. And social media makes it very easy to confirm those beliefs. So vaccines is, and Steve goes very much over it in his book, of how it has been probably the biggest advance in the history of humanity. And now there is all these groups in Italy, in the United States, that are trying to get kids not to be vaccinated. We get measles back, we get all sorts of strange things. How can that be? Well, there are communities. If you doubt about vaccines, you go to YouTube, you will see an anti-vaccination, anti-vaxxers video, and then you will, once you click on that video, YouTube will select for you a stream of similar videos that confirm that belief. By the time you watch 10 of these videos over the course of 2 hours, you'll be completely convinced of that. So I think that one aspect of social media that worries me, apart from this emotional bit, is that it makes these strange beliefs become really very easy to spread. I mean, some of you know that there is a big community of people right now who believe the earth is flat. I'm not joking. I mean, there are people in America particularly who believe the earth is flat. I mean, it seems to me that even if you just spend 5 minutes on a plane, you see that it isn't. But there are videos on YouTube, and there are people who believe this, and I have no idea how they manage to believe it, but there are people who believe that the Cuban Missile Crisis never happened, that the US was never in the moon, and you can spend your life reading this, hearing these videos. So that's one.
The windows in the airplane distort the horizon. So just the glass in the window of the
That's
plane.
why.
That's why it only looks.
It looks curved, but
yes.
and how do they explain that you never fall off? I don't know. I need to see those
Because
videos.
Antarctica is a ring around the disk.
I see. That's
we
right.
live on a disk, and Antarctica is all the way around it. Yeah, I think it's a lot of these superstitions and conspiracy theories, of course, came way before social media. I mean, there were anti-Semitic conspiracy theories against every ethnic group, every racial group that led to riots and genocides and pogroms, and like-minded communities. Whether social media is going to steer the world permanently in the wrong direction, or whether this happened, took people by surprise and we haven't yet put in the countermeasures, is still an open question. I know that YouTube, after this feature was called to their attention, I think they have now turned off that algorithm.
Yeah, 1 or 2 days ago they did a change, I think. Yes.
Yes. So the question is, if these problems are called to the attention of the people in charge of the technology, will it be like any kind of problem solving, where the solution creates a new problem and it takes a while to solve the problem brought about by the solution? I would perhaps I'll ask a question of raised by your talk, which is that the forces that have been unleashed by globalization and technology seem to be pretty unstoppable. I mean, we're not going to go back to audio cassettes. We're not going to go back to typewriters. People are not going to, young people are not going to stay in their country all their lives. we're going to want to buy the best smartphone regardless of, Spanish people aren't going to buy Spanish iPhones, and Italian people buy Italian iPhones. So we're not going to have them go into reverse. Do we know why, though, they would particularly lead to populist politicians who don't actually propose solutions to any of these problems, including growing inequality? In the United States in particular, all of the policies of Donald Trump have been in the direction of increasing inequality. None of them have been involved in retraining people whose jobs will inevitably be made obsolete by these technological shifts. And I have grappled with the question of whether the explanation for the rise of populism, pushing back against all of the Enlightenment currents of 250 years, and trying to explain them, there is the economic and the technological explanations, but then there's also the cultural backlash explanation that with the expansion of rights and dignity to women, to racial minorities, to gay people, to immigrants, to that the people who are none of those things, the older white men, often with less education, who are statistically the biggest supporters of populism, feel that their claim to dignity and worth has been eroded, and the attempt to make America great again or make Poland great again is often triggered, often not necessarily concentrated on the people whose jobs are threatened, although it does to some extent, but also the people who are doing economically okay, but who feel that the immigrants, the terrorists, the minorities who are usurping their prestige need to be resisted. And which is why even in the United States, even though there is some prediction of populism from economic dislocation, particularly in the towns that have been most threatened by Chinese imports, for example, but you don't see support for Donald Trump among African Americans, even though many of them are subject to the same economic forces. And in the United States, the best predictor of voting for Donald Trump was how much your area has people who search for racist jokes on Google. And that was even a better predictor than, certainly than socioeconomic status. Education was a huge predictor as well. Which is not to argue against the relevance of these huge tectonic forces for populism, but why they should lead to populism as opposed to, say, a big surge why it should be right-wing nationalist populism as opposed to, say, left-wing populism, which of course we did see in the 30s, is a question.
So I agree with you that the forces that the people who are most unhappy are white, middle-aged, male, less educated, rural. So those are clear. We agree on the demographics. And so the question is, what comes first? They become racist because they're unhappy with their jobs and lives, or they're unhappy with jobs and lives because they're threatened by the perceived advance of women's rights, etc., etc. Now, the reason I find the cultural explanation unsatisfactory is there is no immigration in Hungary. Not at all. The Hungary is a completely homogeneous society. There is some immigration in Poland, but it's very little. I mean, we see this happening in countries with no immigration, with no racial diversity. Why are always these social groups that you refer to feeling threatened? Well, I mean, if you are somebody whose whole life, self-esteem, etc., is associated with industrial job, with a mining job, with a manufacturing job, with driving a truck around, and your life has been, in the book I tell a story about the Crow Indians, and I talk about cultural devastation. So the Crow Indians have all these tribal habits, and they go to war, and they sing songs, etc. The US government puts them in a reservation. And a Chicago professor, Jonathan Lear, talks about how, he wrote a book about how they lost the whole meaning of their lives. It's like, why do I have this song if there's no war to have? Why do I have this? So suddenly all of these rites and all these things, all these rituals that I am engaged to as a Crow Indian are gone. And the idea is, you have the people you go for drinks, you have the people that you share your life with, you have all of those things that suddenly lose meaning. Then you have a cultural backlash. I mean, I think the two things are happening. But why then, and I think Stephen's question is good, is why then go for Trump? Why then, and I think what they are telling you is we can go back to a safer past. And it's true, Trump is not solving your social problem, he's solving your emotional problem. You think you don't have a future now, and we're going to give you. I think the key word is the wall. It's the wall, right? The whole world is changing, you're feeling uncertain, we're going to give you a wall, and that protects you. And we're going to make also a wall between Britain and Europe, and that's going to protect you. Oh, but you work in Sutherland, you are in the biggest exporting city for cars in Europe. Your plans depend on access for the European market. Oh no, I feel all these Europeans, they're taking control for my life. So I'm going to protect you by making a wall. It's not directly economic interest as in my whole thing is threatened now, but its progress is threatening my self-worth and it's threatening my well-being as a member of a society in many more ways than economic. So the cultural element, I'm not going to dispute it, is there, but I think it comes second and not first. We've had 40 years of advance in female rights, we've had 40 years in advance of blacks' rights in America, with 40 years of all these changes, 40, 50 years, it's just showing up in the last 2 or 3. And what has really been changing in the last 2 or 3 is that we really are having, for maybe the last 10, we are on the verge of a gigantic change in the job market. Just to give you a number I didn't give before. Between 10 and 50%, depending on what estimate you look at, OCDE, some Oxford professors, of jobs could disappear over the next 15 to 20 years. 1 in 10 to 1 to half. I mean, I think half is ridiculous, right? But a lot of jobs are going to be affected, and a lot of people are going to feel anxious, I think.
The question is, will they be replaced by video game costume designers?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I feel...
Pet psychiatrists?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The question is, pet psychiatrists, community managers, you're right. The question is, can you take the truck driver that he can be a community manager or a pet groomer? Probably not. Probably his son is going to find those jobs. But these people are still going to be threatened, I think. So the transition is always a problem, even if progress is for the best.
Me gustaría saber en qué sois optimistas y cómo veis el mundo dentro de 20 años. Y la pregunta, ¿qué pasará, qué será de Europa en 20 años? ¿Cómo lo veis? Tanto tú como Steven desde Harvard.
Make your predictions, Steve.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I do think that there are demographic forces that are pushing against authoritarian populism, and we've mentioned a number of them. Since we know that populism is more popular among older populations, we know what happens to older populations, and we know what happens to younger populations. This is the most certain thing in life.
Yes.
We know that populism is more popular among the less educated, and the world is getting more educated. It's more popular in rural areas, and the world is urbanizing. So if you combine education, urbanization, and generational turnover, it suggests that populism probably may not be the wave of the long-term future, even though there could be a lot of turmoil in the shorter term.
So maybe that's a great optimistic thought to finish on. I would say progress is certain to help. We're going to have better use of energy with intelligent systems, better use of cities with intelligent cars, better health with intelligent diagnosis. So all these things are going to be massively improved. I think the transition is going to be tricky, and I think that it's going to require a lot of people like Steve Kinker to be writing positive books. Thank you. And by the way, we'll sign books later. So thank you. Patriotism.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias a todos. Hemos disfrutado de la razón y la ciencia. Yo creo que ahora ya es momento de que nos soltemos y que tanto los que son de aquí como los que han venido de fuera disfruten de este Madrid liberal que nos espera allá afuera. Muchas
Enjoy
gracias
Madrid,
por
Susan.
venir.